Hello, it's me, Karen Romano Young. We're here with Alice the giraffe and some sea stars from Alaska, and a girl, a raccoon, and the midnight moon. Chapter 48, The Noon Raccoon. November 3rd to 4th, 3 days to Election Day. If Mrs. Malamar knew where Marianne and Eric were, she wasn't saying. Pearl figured she couldn't know precisely, but she marched on, and she made sure Pearl did too. She wrote daily statements about the fate of the library, incorporating statistics provided by Pearl about how many new library cards were issued and how many caps had been sold, while warning readers that these numbers, generated by kids for the most part, might not be enough to sway the vote. Unfortunately, adult humans were the only ones who could vote. Pearl thought it was impossible to tell, in the days after the Halloween hell, how the vote will go down. November 1st felt like the real start of winter, a steel gray sky making the early darkness feel even darker and unpromising. "Where are Marianne and Eric?" she persistently pestered Mrs. Malamar. The old raccoon shrugged as dramatically as Tallulah did when Pearl asked her, twice a day or more, if she'd seen Mr. Nichols. "They come, they go," said Tallulah maddeningly. Mrs. Malamar's grandchildren had never been anywhere but Lancaster Avenue. Why did she have such a calm attitude? In the end, her silence forced Pearl to shut up too. If Mrs. Malamar wasn't panicking, she must have faith in Marianne. That didn't stop Pearl from lying awake when she was supposed to be asleep, thinking about Marianne out there somewhere in the dark, trying to do what? After school, but before homework each day, Pearl climbed the straight stairs and made a serious attempt to select the very best books to recommend. On the way to school in the morning, Pearl dropped her latest Rex in the little mail slot at 22.5 Beep Street. When she came home in the evening, edited pages were neatly rolled and tucked into the big mail slot at 8 Beep Street. Since the column was something that was going into print, it had to be just so in terms of writing, and Pearl saw that Mrs. M was doing a lot of tweaks and twists to pull her words up to the style of Marianne's. But as far as the books being recommended went, Pearl seemed to be doing fine. Mrs. M went so far as to write her a note about it. Vincent would approve. "What about Marianne?" asked Pearl, never willing to let a chance to ask slip by. "Mary Ann is working on a plan of her own," wrote Mrs. M. "That's reality, so she doesn't get an opinion." Pearl didn't need anyone spelling out reality for her anymore. She was well aware of everything that could happen, that could still happen, even after all that she and Mom and Marianne had done. She kept things pushed away as much as she could behind her mental wall, but her fear about the election day vote squeaked through like cold November wind blowing through the pine trees. Marianne was gone. Pearl and Mom would have to go somewhere else too. Only Gully would be left to tell the story of the library that was once where the new apartments were, and who could guess what kind of story he'd tell? Pearl brought printouts of Rex to school for Ms. Judge to distribute, complete with voting locations and hours so kids could take them home. The books and her words were going to work, but Pearl was on the lookout for something, anything more. It was all well enough for Marianne to go off on a mission, well enough for Bruce to continually crunch numbers, well enough for Mrs. Malamar to quietly use the midnight moon to shine a light on good books. Pearl felt a growing desire to get loud. On a sunny Saturday morning after Halloween, Pearl put on Bruce's raccoon costume, gathered a sheaf of papers hot off the printer under her arm, and headed for Tallulah's newsstand. "I have a message from Mrs. Malamar about the special edition," said Tallulah, indicating a sign she'd hung outside. "Special edition of the Midnight Moon, the Noon Raccoon. Special library vote edition on sale for a limited time only on behalf of Mrs. Malamar." "Have a seat," said Tallulah. "I'll do the honors." Tallulah switched the Saturday Morning Moon stack with the stack of noon raccoons and started clipping them up like they were real newspapers. Library closing. Tallulah, do you think this is going to work? We'll soon find out, said Tallulah. A sidebar about suspension of disbelief. Suspension of disbelief. Successful fantasy writing depends on a suspension of disbelief. Readers are predisposed to accept reality. So how do you get them to accept unreality? By making everything else except the unreality as believable as possible. It can't all be unicorns and rainbows. The darker, more fragrant, more real the woods are, the more you'd swear you've been in those woods before, the stranger the sudden appearance of a unicorn would be, and the more acceptable. The grayer the sky, the wetter the rain, the more clearly angled the sun is, the more acceptable the rainbow will be. So here's the thing. Lancaster Avenue wasn't some kind of magical place. Gully's gate was still rusty, still squeaked when he cranked it up or down. Francine was still separated from her parents, and Oleg still got C's. The library's spiral stairs were still decrepit. People still screamed about the rats, the jobs, the subway, the city, the kids. What better place for the midnight moon? What better place for raccoons who could read? What better place for a yes vote? What better place for a single mom and her child who couldn't keep quiet? Believe it or don't, but it's more fun if you do. By M.A.M. Pearl could feel the vibrations from underground as a subway train entered the station and waited for the rush of footsteps coming up the stairs. Lucky she was loud, this librarian's child. Lucky she'd learned something about drama. Special edition! Pearl called from inside the raccoon suit. Check out the noon raccoon! Bad news in the light of day! She took a breath and bellowed out the headline. Library closing! What? A young father said. He turned back, one kid in a front pack, one held by the hand. Dad, look at that raccoon! Library closing! Yelled Pearl. She pointed a paw up at the papers dangling from the newsstand's eave. Take one! He dropped a crumpled buck on the counter. Monkey see, monkey do. Everybody stopped because everybody stopped. Everybody took one, and everybody had something to say. Why's the library closing? Pearl asked. How would you feel if it did? And when she saw the dismay in their eyes, she felt her heart lift in hope. Don't know when the last time I was there, but still, it's an institution, isn't it? Someone said. This damn city, gone to the dogs, another said. Or should I say the raccoons, laughing at Pearl's costume. I heard the statue got his head back. Is that true? I heard they're tearing the place down. Is that true? Tearing it down to make affordable housing, but replacing a library? Isn't there a new library up near? I hear raccoons around here could actually read. Is that true? In between shouting out the headline and using her big paws to point to the papers, Pearl talked back. Closing because the city thinks nobody cares. Closing because nobody believes in our neighborhood. Losing our library unless it gets the vote. Raccoons wrote this newspaper. To each person who picked up a paper, Tallulah said, District voting place is the Lancaster Avenue Public School, neighbor. And as each neighbor walked away, Pearl yelled, Don't forget to vote. Jonathan Yoicks arrived, his reading raccoon hat on his head. He stood panting before the newsstand and said, The head reading raccoon, I presume. Pearl made a little bow. What are you up to this time? Purposeful publishing to promote the library. We can only stay open if the library gets the votes. Then why does this headline say the library's closing, said Yoicks. To warn the neighbors what might happen if they don't vote, said Pearl. Haven't you ever heard of reverse psychology? Then you believe they will approve it? I believe they will, but I don't know they will, said Pearl. The neighborhood still has to prove they're really reading raccoons. You mean? I mean they have to put in their vote. It's a reading raccoon referendum. She explained what would happen if the library won the vote, the way Mom and Bruce had explained it to her. Bruce was going to City Wildlife. Ramon would take partial retirement, working part-time. Alice was going on maternity leave, and Simon would take up the slack, with help from Pearl and Francine, until she returned. Reduced staff means reduced costs, and Mom would take over as library manager. She's going to be the fearless leader? Yoik said. That would be so great. He stared up at the papers. Neighborhood lady leads library. Reading Raccoon roots, library wings. Pearl added. Reading Raccoon's rise, become library's leading light. That's long, said Yoicks, but it's great. Then he leaned closer to Pearl. I'm going to see your mom right now. Then he looked at Tallulah to make sure she was listening, before asking Pearl if she'd seen Christopher Nichols. I've got an idea about security. And construction, too, he said. Stay tuned. He picked up a noon raccoon. Then he took a photo of Pearl sitting in the raccoon suit, posing like she was casually making notes as if she was running the newsstand, to make it easy for anyone looking at the photo to suspend disbelief. When he was done, he snapped his fingers. What? Said Pearl. Done, said Yoicks. Done with what? Asked Pearl. But he was gone before he told her.